So let us begin or continue, actually. In less than 3 weeks, at our Seder, or your Sdarim, if you get what I mean, we will recite many things, but the one uppermost on my mind is the one I'm about to share with you now from the Haggadah. We recite it, and it's funny that we sing it in a rather upbeat, I guess tunes can vary, but the one I'm thinking of isn't terribly sober, but certainly the message is. Vehi she'amda lavotenu. This promise has sustained our ancestors, that we will have an ongoing covenant with God and we will receive the land. This promise has sustained our ancestors and us. For not only one enemy has risen against us to annihilate us, rather, b'chol dor, vador, in every generation, people rise against us to annihilate us. But the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us from their hand. Not necessarily particular individuals, but our nation as a whole. Yitziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, is in fact a steady occurrence, an everyday event. We celebrate the festival of Yitziat Mitzrayim not only because we remember it, nor just because we re-experience it, but because it is, l'tza'arenu, a permanent drama. Every generation, says Rabbi Soloveitchik, every generation lives through the actual experience of Mitzrayim and Yitziat Mitzrayim. Last night was the 5th terrorist attack here in less than 2 weeks. This time, 5 were murdered in the Bnei Brak city near Tel Aviv. 2, ironically, Ukrainian foreign workers, Viktor Sorokopot and Dima Mitnick, 23 and 32, and Yaakov Shalom, 36, a father of 4, Avishai Yecheskel, 29, a father of 1, and next month is due to have another child. And Arab Israeli police officer Amir Khoury, 32. And while he was wounded, Amir succeeded in killing, or as they say, neutralizing the terrorist. And by the way, Hanan Rubin, I think 19 years old, a young man, organized buses today encouraging fellow Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, of Jerusalem and Bnei Brak to attend Amir's funeral. And hundreds attended that funeral in his northern Druze village. And on Sunday evening in Hadera, 2 19-year-olds, border police officers, happened to be in Hadera. Shirel Abukrat, whose mother brought her family from France in 2006 to take them away from her fear of France and what would be. And Yazan Falach, a Druze, and we know the Druze serve in our armed forces. Now, what made Yazan especially stand out is, as you probably know, when you are an only child, you do not have to take on a battle position when you serve in the army. But he insisted. This picture was taken half an hour before they were taken from us. Yehi Zichram, all of them, Baruch. It's part of what I need to do here as representing this country and us connecting between and across the seas. I'm sure you realize the importance of that. Gives me no pleasure to have to share this with you, but I know you, and you're part of our nation as we are part of you. So, let's continue. In weeks past, we sought to find and see ourselves in encounters with biblical heroes. We studied them and their narratives to see how we related. And did we find traits of ours in them or vice versa? In this series, The Triumph of Life, as we look toward our contemporary days of commemoration and celebration, beginning with Yom HaShoah, following Pesach, I have chosen a topic which in effect asks us to think about crises and even tragedies and our coping strategies. Now, we can face crises of different sorts. They can be individual, I want to say personal, but I think even the communal and the national are considered to be personal. And I think it's important, and I know that I am overwhelmed with this question of how we deal with serious crises, whether it is health, whether it is social, and whether it is military, or whether it is something as horrific as these last 2 weeks here, or the Shoah. And what's essential is to think, what makes me persist, carry on, and even rebuild again and flourish? What makes each of us tick? I'm not sure that I always get me. On Sunday night, as I said, we had this tragedy in Hadera, losing these two beautiful 19-year-olds. And you get tense, especially when that was just after what happened in Beersheba. But I had not things that I absolutely had to do, but things that I wanted to do downtown. And so I found myself the day after, when I would have thought that I would have been a little more careful, I found myself walking around downtown, including getting something at the Shuk Machane Yehuda, for I think about 5 hours. And as I'm doing that, I'm thinking to myself, I have other types of fears, but I'm not walking around afraid here. So it's an interesting activity to think of what goes on as we face crises that are real and right here. It might be, as I say, a situation where one didn't choose to be there, or it might be a situation where one makes a conscious decision to be there, like this Druze soldier who did not have to choose a battle position. What is it that made him do that? There can be a variety of reasons. He grew up knowing that that's what guys his age do, or he realizes to be able to live in this land safely, he has to serve, and he wouldn't feel comfortable taking advantage of the fact that he's an only child. You can't be sure. But in both situations, whether we choose or we don't choose, as in the Shoah, what gives us strength? Again, because I really want you to be honest with yourselves and think and share, whether it's a health issue, whether it's caring for somebody in distress, whatever it is, or if it is a national issue or a communal issue. What gives you strength? What gives you strength? And while you're thinking, I need to share with you a song that Naomi Shemer wrote some time ago. And it's been shared a few times today in the aftermath. You won't beat me that fast. And I want you to picture a 5th grade class today being asked to sing this song in a classroom, the teacher, Yishai Rosenblit. And these 5th graders, I watched dancing and singing and holding up their hands. And interestingly, people say, with a song like that, you won't beat me that fast, people, when they first heard her come out, assumed that it was going to have military tone to it. But no. From my window, I can see a street like an overflowing river, and people go for their day job, and young children go to school with their backpack on their backs. And in their hands, they hold some myrtle branches blooming. Suddenly, it becomes clear. And I say to myself, you won't beat me. I am not being defeated so fast. And from my window, I can see a plane takes off, a plane flying, hiding in the distant clouds. I hear a machine in the right tune that rolls around in the outdoors and markets. Suddenly, it becomes clear, and I say to myself, you won't beat me. I am not being defeated so fast. What, according to Naomi Shemer, is the way that our people doesn't let ourselves be defeated? If you need to, take a moment to reread it.
It's hope.
Hope, but what else? Paying attention to the different.
And a faith, it's a different way of looking at things. You're not going to defeat me.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what is she
We keep
Yes,
doing,
Okay, I think
keep doing the things we
Hold
do
on.
every day.
Right.
carrying on.
Okay, Bev. Yes. Did I hear
Carrying
Brenda?
on. Yes, just carrying on.
Yep. And that's what they've been saying all day on the radio. And please understand, I am framing our discussion of the topic that was pre-planned, but has so much to do with this. So you go on with your shigra, routine. So the child goes to school. The adult goes to work. And the streets, because the weather is nice, have people sitting at cafes. It's not easy, and you think twice.
Yeah.
And you wonder if your daughter's coming back for rehearsal tonight, do you say, I'll pick you up at the train because you think that's safer, or she's safer on the bus to come back here?
Decision.
That's what it's like.
There is no.
That's
right
what it's like.
or there is
Now,
no wrong.
so what she is suggesting, Naomi Shemer, is that the way for a nation to prevail is simply for many, many people to wake up each day ready to take on the tasks of the day, whether it's studying, building, creating. And was it so different in the Shoah? If you think about it, sure, the routine was entirely different from what they were used to,
But
but we hear so many stories
But in the
of
show,
how they were desperate to hang on to routine activities.
but they
Okay, so
had no
now
control. They had no control whatsoever.
I disagree. I disagree respectfully, Esther. That will be one of our points today. They had no control of whether they were in an isolated ghetto or in a concentration camp, or whether they were going to be murdered.
Yeah.
But as long as they were alive, we know so many
Oh,
who
yes.
did have control over their mental
Yeah, that I agree.
psyche.
That I agree.
Okay, all right. Now, I gave you a bit of a breather, and I seriously want for you to suggest how or what gives you strength. Or if you don't want to talk about yourself, say something else, or somebody who you've observed and that you've been in awe of, or you've wondered or been baffled by, because they do have a strength that has kept them going. Again, whether personal, whether not as personal, whether national, what are the things that keep somebody going in times of crisis?
Having a goal.
Okay, can you say more about that?
Okay,
Yeah.
you know, again, from a lot of my reading, people who had been in the Shoah, if they had a goal, if they knew they had some kind of purpose to their life, that's what helped carry them through. And quite often, if I recall correctly, when Prima Levi would meet people who didn't have a goal, he encouraged them to say, well, isn't there something that you want to do? And he would encourage them, and then they would have some kind of a purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it can also be personal. I know during the war, I lost 5 cousins, but that's a different story. I'm talking about my personal experience. When my husband died, it was Yom Kippur, and I was a mess till Passover. And then I went to my daughter's Seder, and coming home, I started crying because I realized that I had a good time. And so at that moment, I made a decision that I have no right to squander whatever time God gave me not to enjoy my kids.
Okay.
So there comes a moment of awareness. I realized then that I gave myself permission to go on.
Okay. I think, Esther, you are continuing Bev's thought. In a way, you're being aware of the gift that you still have of life and your relationship with your children, grandchildren. That's a goal of sorts, and you want to make the most of that. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Bracha. I don't have this, but having watched Auntie Betty,
Yes.
Betty Ramberg, how she lost 2 children. She lived till 106, but she had an abiding belief in God, and that God looked after her, and it really, really sustained her. And I wish I had that. For me, what just helps is to be in the moment and have an appreciation for the gift of life, and to cherish it, and to try and always keep that, how lucky with all the, with whatever, that life is a gift.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And
All right.
Bracha,
So Linda mentioned this Betty, a special lady, and her belief in God sustained her, despite the fact, because she was old enough to lose, even though we know sometimes you lose even when you're young, child. And then Linda is also referring to what Esther said, in just life is a gift, and you take it in the moment, and you have to make the most of that gift. Thank you. Somebody else.
yeah, Bracha, it's Merle. I think also that having community, people around you, that you need support from others. And I think even in the Shoah, that people who had, that sense of one person trying just to help and support another, I think is really important. And I think it's hugely important today as well.
Absolutely. Just as an aside, what's the word in Hebrew, a 2-letter word for nation? If you take that, I always get confused. Is it a kametz, the one line under the ayin, and makes it If you take that away and put, I think a chirik, the dot,
Yeah,
what is it? An im.
With.
So what does im mean? With.
With.
With,
So isn't that,
that's
say it
true.
all, a nation, whether it is
Then we're with each other.
is with each other. And that is what it's all about,
I think that's why they talk about the word venatnu, which spells the same from right to left or left to right. You give, you receive.
Yafet. Isn't that called a paleo something? Okay. All right. Anybody else, please?
Yeah, I'd like to say something if I get it.
Yes?
Can I add to the conversation about Betty? Just a personal comment with me.
Yes,
Betty,
Gloria.
I don't know how many people know that Betty moved to Toronto and joined Beth Tikvah very shortly thereafter, her husband passed away. She was a very young woman. She still had her children and so on. And we became good friends. And she said to me many, many, many a time, why, Gloria, am I here? I've lost my husband. I've lost 2 of my children. Why am I here? And I kept saying to her, Betty, God has a purpose for you. And when God has a purpose for you, you have to stay and just tough it out. When he's ready for you, he'll come get you.
Good words to her, Gloria. Good words. Thank you.
Well,
Anybody else? I'm waiting because I'm trying to force you. You might not want to share, but at least be thinking of what's your coping strategy during a difficult time? Do you surprise yourself?
I have an idea.
Yes.
And the way I live is that everyone is here to make a contribution to the world, to your community, to your family, to your synagogue, whatever you think the contribution is going to be. When you've made it, God takes you away. And until you've made it, you're here. So you have to work on it.
Okay, I can't see who's speaking.
Sarah.
Sarah, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Bracha, I also remember during the 48 war,
Yes,
how people coped. We lived in a 2-story building, and the people from upstairs moved in with us for safety. And it's amazing how suddenly there was space for everybody. It was a family with 4 children. And suddenly nobody complained, nobody said tight, it was amazing how we coped and without even giving it a second thought.
yeah,
Yeah. Bracha, to answer your question, it's Merle again. I mean,
Yes.
I think that some people cope by reaching out and others cope by becoming, I'm not going to use the word introverted, but by not reaching out, by becoming insular in some ways. And I've seen that many, many times, both in the present and in the past.
yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. Okay,
Bracha, I think there's something that goes along with some of the things that have already been said. And I really think back to my mother, who was undergoing chemotherapy at a time when it was even more severe to undergo that kind of treatment. And no one's saying that it's easy now, but it was a
Right.
lot worse when she was going through it. And she took control of the parts of her life that she could control. In other words, she would have these discussions with her doctors, because when she had to go in for chemo, she had to be in the hospital for 3, 4, 5, 6 days. And she would say to them, you know, Hanukkah is coming. I really want to be with my family. Can we arrange for my appointment so that I will get through the worst of it and be able to join them when Hanukkah is here? And they, you know what? And because she was taking control, they worked with her so that she could have that something to look forward to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, an important comment. So we can
Bracha,
go ahead.
I also think it's important to talk about your feelings, to share your feelings. I think that it can provide such relief, not to, I can't think of the word I'm looking, not to just keep it all to yourself, but when you share a feeling, when you share a fear, it also helps address it and move forward.
Absolutely. First of all, sometimes when you do that, you find out you're not alone in that fear.
For sure, for sure.
Today, on one of the talk shows, they asked people to call in with questions of what do we do when our child of 8 asks us certain things, and do we go on as usual? And they interviewed with 2 psychologists on the show. A young man, his name is Akiva Kaufman. He's a medic, and he was one of the first at the scene last night in Bnei Brak. And he's an observant Jew. And as he was being asked questions, one of the hosts said, is it your emunah, your faith, that keeps you going after incidents like this? And he said, for sure. But then one of the psychologists asked if she could suggests that it's not just his faith, but something along the lines, what a couple of you have already said, that it was his kova hamiktsoi, his professional hat, that also gives him the strength. In other words, they couldn't stress enough how important it is, like Naomi Shemer said earlier, going about your business, continuing with your vital tasks, and feeling that there's something for you to do. We all know if there's some kind of crisis, to just sit around is horrific. But for the psychologist to suggest this to the Akiva Kaufman, I found very, very interesting, and he readily agreed. He looked to me to be a Haredi, but he was willing to say that it's not just his faith that keeps us going, and this is what God has planned. No, but he realizes that he is able to do something that's equally something that gives him strength.
But Bracha, that doesn't apply only to the medical people. I'm thinking of all the teachers.
Of course. I'm just mentioning him because he was being interviewed today on the scene there. Everyone, we've said this in different contexts, has a different role. We said this when we talked about the Kohanim. Everyone has a different role, equally significant. Now, let's continue this train of thought. And again, please pay attention to the following psukim that we're going to explore briefly. From Tehillim, I am still and my soul is tranquil, like a baby sleeping in his mother's bosom. Why is that baby still? Why is that baby feeling tranquil?
Feel safe.
What's behind that?
It's protected.
It feels protected. The baby has no reason to not trust fully in his or her mother. Now, this is a psalm that we're all familiar with. LeDavid Adonai Orivi Ishi. And I often read something like this in Hebrew because we hear it at shul, and I think it sometimes sounds more familiar in the Hebrew. LeDavid Adonai Orivi Ishi. Mimi ira. Adonai ma'oz chayai mimi efchad. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. From whom shall I be frightened? Now, it's impossible for us to imagine, but I just want to ask, do you think that this pasuk, which was said by many in the camps, in the ghetto, would have given you strength had you lived through the darkest period of time in Jewish history?
Depends if you
When
will.
you see that pasuk, or something like this, a person's fear brings him down, but his trust in God uplifts him. How do you relate to that? Do those two psukim from Tehillim and from Proverbs, and there are many like that in those books, how do you feel when you read those?
I think they are the same.
Well, they're basically saying the same thing, but I'm saying, do they speak to you?
Bracha,
Yes.
I would say that to some extent they don't, because like Linda, I don't have that blind faith, that real belief that, you know, I really think that we have to contribute to our own and find some of our own inner strength. And simply believing is not enough. And I'm not even sure that if I did, It goes back to that old story about the Orthodox person believing in God, and God sends all kinds of things for him to help save himself.
Yes.
And belief in, and he doesn't. I think we really have to work to control, to some extent, our own fate.
Yeah, but the statement is God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah, that we really have to. So I don't think it's enough. And I do think that when we look at this world, there is pure evil, and we'd be very foolish not to be afraid of it.
Okay, Brenda. Yeah.
The one
Bracha,
thing that I
I feel,
find,
when you read something like this, what it's saying is the basis of our strength is that there's something there watching over us. There is a God. I don't know, I could not go through life without my belief in God. When I have any kind of trouble, tragedy, whatever you call it, that hits me, I always do my best to do what I can in that situation. And then I have to let go and let God deal with it. It's the only way I can get through life. And we're here for a very short time. Even 120 years is a very short time. And I do the best that I can with the equipment that God gave me.
All right,
It's my
that's a
faith in
very
God.
important line, how you just phrased that. That you do the best you can. God's given you equipment and you do the best you can, but it's comforting to know that God is there.
Yes.
Like
Okay.
the rabbi says, we have no control how long we live, but we can control how we live.
Yes. Okay,
But
I think,
I feel very envious. I want with all my heart to believe that God is, that would allow me to let go, as Michael, you say. But okay.
okay, I just want to mention the song that talks to me is Gesher Tsar Ma'od. Again, it's the same feelings done in a similar, in a different sort of way, but singing that song to myself helps me.
does everybody know that song? Kol
Yes.
ha'olam kulo gesher tsar miod.
Gesher Tsar Meod. Gesher Tsar Meod.
Vayikar lo lefached klal. Okay.
It's a beautiful.
And another one I just looked up, Shaul Chernikovsky's Saki Saki.
Sachki sachki. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, it's interesting because we are moved to write these songs, but then the songs are meant to move us or to give us the certain strength. What is one of the most powerful songs? And we sing it in shul, we sing it at ceremonies, and here in Israel, they sing it at soccer games for their team, Ani Ma'amin. And when we all sing that together, or the Avinu Malkeinu, there is perhaps nothing as powerful as that. Now,
I think what
Marlene.
I think you're talking about Ani Ma'amin and Avinu Malkeinu. That is almost, those songs are almost like keys that unlock some of our deepest feelings that on the ordinary day, like Linda, I would never go to that place. It just would not be sort of like, the Tehillim and the Mishlei that you've
Yes.
quoted here would never come to my mind automatically. But believing in a God, when I hear those melodies and when I sing them together in the presence of a kahal, is like somebody opening a door to that part of my psyche.
True.
Beautifully said. I think what I'm thinking as you're saying that is this takes us back to my initial question of what makes somebody or allows somebody to be in a position where they have to be very strong if it's not their belief in God. Now, I don't know the background of, except that we know that he's Druze and he chose this 19-year-old to be in that position. But I think what it's pointing to is the diversity within our nation of people who are committed and have this strength. And it might be the belief in God, or as Bev initially said, and then a few of you echoed it, of having a goal that you're committed to. But there's got to be something. You can't just go about being involved with life and certainly not crises and not be moved by something.
How about gratitude for what you have and what the
Well,
country
that's,
gives you?
of course, for sure. Now, look at these next two texts by a Rabbi Lazer Brody and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Bitachon, complete trust in God, gives a person the measure of personal security to the extent that even the most fearful tidings cannot blemish his or her self-composure. Bitachon erases worry like nothing else. Now, we've already said, some of us are envious of those who have such bitachon that nothing brings them down. Now, I think we find that a little difficult to really believe. I don't know, though. I don't know. But Rabbi Sachs, Rono Livracha, says something somewhat different. Faith is not certainty. It is the courage to live with uncertainty. I find that much more powerful. But it takes us back, I think, to what Michael said. Faith, first of all, believing is believing. You don't know. Because if you knew, then it wouldn't be belief, right?
You know,
So everything is uncertain. And there are days that we feel that more so than others. But it is a courage to live despite that. And I think that that colors many of the people walking around this country today and individuals in Toronto that have a purpose. But I think as hard as it is to believe, this was also the case during the Shoah that kept people going. And this Mendel, his last name was Mendel Grossman, and he decided to keep himself going, but also for the sake of the next generation in the camps, he had a job that allowed him to have a camera. So Mendel takes out his camera, no more flowers, clouds, nature, stills, or landscapes. Amid the horror all around him, he has found his destiny to photograph and leave behind a testimony for all. I bring that as suggesting what else might go on in the mind of somebody who is involved in such a horror and nonetheless is still thinking of the next generation. But it has a dual purpose, that camera. It will allow us to be witnesses to what he's filming, but it also gave him a purpose amidst the horror. Behind a testimony for all generations about the great tragedy unfolding before his eyes.
By the way,
Now,
Bracha,
yes.
you were talking about bitachon. I don't remember which rabbi it was who said the first 4 letters in the alphabet. No, he said the word Agadah takes the four first letters in the alphabet, but it misses the bet, the bitachon. And without bitachon, nothing exists.
Wow. Interesting. Okay.
I just want to add something.
Yes,
And
Beth.
that's because last year you encouraged me to do something about Ringelblum. And so, you know, the Oneg Shabbos
Yes,
archives.
go ahead.
And you know how, again, I think it gave a lot of people who were in the Warsaw Ghetto a purpose, because so many of them were writing about what was going on. And he wanted to leave that archive so that people would know what had happened, not only in the Warsaw Ghetto, but throughout Poland and throughout the camps. And because of that archive, you know, so much of what really occurred is documented. And, you know, we continue to get information from those documents that are housed in Warsaw today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let me just put in to our friend Bev, who has taken many seminars at Yad Vashem, but she's also volunteers for the Azrieli Foundation, has been responsible for writing survivors' memoirs together with them. Yeshikochech. So just as we did when studying the biblical narratives, and we paid attention to gut reactions that we had to episodes and to characters, I'm going to ask that we read some of these descriptions of people in the Shoah and pay attention to your feelings as we continue. And some of them will be a little lengthy as the chapters we read in the Bible. So Abraham Twersky, a rabbi, a psychiatrist. Rabbi Joseph Schneerson ran a seminary in Russia. I just want to say again, as hard as it is for us to guess or imagine how we would have acted in these circumstances, I'm curious whether you're going to say, I just can't imagine that I would have done that. You never know, but okay. When the communists came to power, they ordered all religious seminaries to close. Rabbi Schneerson defied the order and continued teaching religion. One day, a government officer confronted him and ordered him to close his school. The Rebbe refused. The officer pulled out a gun and said, "You will close the school or you will be killed." Rabbi Schneerson showed no emotion and quietly responded, "The school will remain open." The officer could not help being impressed by the rabbi's calm demeanor and complete lack of fear. "Don't you take me seriously?" he asked. "Aren't you afraid of dying?" The rabbi responded calmly, "Someone who has only one world and many gods is afraid of dying. Someone who has two worlds and only one God has no fear." Rabbi Schneerson's yeshiva remained open. In 1940, he transplanted it to the United States. Today, it has branches throughout the world. And get this, Russian communism is no more. Okay, so if you were in that position, we don't know what we would have done. We don't know. Another character, convinced that no Jew would survive the Shoah, Dita considered it imperative to record Jewish prayers. With no knowledge of Hebrew, she phonetically transcribed prayers as she heard them into Latin characters. Dita was born in Vienna in 1930. Her family fled to Hungary in 1939. In April 1944, they were moved into a ghetto, and in June 1944, deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. In Auschwitz, Dita's mother, Hetty, adopted 15-year-old Zeus Weber, whose family had been murdered. They were sent from Auschwitz to Gelsenkirchen and on to Samerda. It was at this camp that Dita stole stickers from ammunition boxes on which she recorded the prayers recited by a woman named Clary Kana. As the war neared its end, the camp inmates were taken on a death march. Clary Hana was killed in a shelling on Liberation Day. Dita's father, Lajos, was murdered. Dita, her mother, and Zeus were liberated in Reidsholzheim and immigrated to Israel. There was a woman there, Clary Hana. She prayed all day and night. I listened to her prayers and I thought I'd write them down so that if we die, they would know that Jewish women had been there. I sat next to her all night, writing. She prayed in archaic Hebrew, and I recorded the prayers in Latin characters. Now, that's an example of, again, her taking on a purpose, wanting to be sure that the next generation would know what happened. But what amazes is people in these circumstances doing what? Praying, praying, praying. But it wasn't just for the mitzvah of praying. The praying gave them that strength. Now, something else amazing. A Rabbi Ephraim Ostry, who was in the Kovno ghetto and later on concentration camp, was asked halachic questions, shilas. At that time during the war, people still wanted to know, is it okay to do such and such? Is it not okay? And he would give them responsa. And at one point, and we'll look at one, he hid these. And after the war, he goes back and finds them, and in 1959 publishes volumes of these responsa. So significant in that people could have been justified in not caring what the law said, but they did. Now, is that, as we said earlier, because routine, what you're used to, is so important? Or it relates to a goal of maintaining your identity? Now, I'm going to read this a little quickly. It has to do with eating soaked matzah. Is there anybody in this group who goes by, what's it called? Begrets? What?
Yeah.
We're going to see it here. Okay.
Brach.
Yes.
Gebrach.
Okay.
Gebrach.
Gebrach. Right. Okay. So the question: in the winter 1942, several months before Pesach, many of the Jews in the Kovno ghetto began to try to figure out ways to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach, as if they were free. Okay. At that time, even the most basic foods obviously were not available in the ghetto, let alone white flour from which matzah is normally baked. The ghetto prisoners ate whatever they could get their hand on because the black bread that was rationed out was never enough to keep away hunger. And the Germans guarded against any food getting into the ghetto. Precisely because of the plight, people made every effort not to be ensnared by depression or apathy, but to retain their spirits and their psychological strength, hoping that the evil forces would ultimately be destroyed and the prisoners set free. Many of the ghetto prisoners perceived that the only means available to them of opposing the will of their accursed German warders was to maintain some form of Torah study, along with keeping the mitzvahs, so that the Jewish character would not be destroyed. Toward this end, I organized a small secret group of men who undertook to find ways and means of obtaining flour so that they could bake matzahs and fulfill, at the very least, the mitzvah of eating an olive-sized piece of matzah on Passover Eve. One member of the group was Moshe Goldkorn. May God avenge him, a Polish Jew who had escaped the German murderers and found his way to Lithuania, only to be cast into the Kovno ghetto along with us. This man labored in the Jordan Brigade and came into contact with the Lithuanians with whom he could barter for flour. Our next problem was how to get the flour into the ghetto, since the Germans guarded each one of the entrances and were especially careful that no food from potatoes to bread should get in through the gates undetected. But Goldkorn took it upon himself, literally at the risk of his life, to locate a source for flour, and from time to smuggle a small amount into the ghetto. His joy at being granted the merit of making it possible for Jews to fulfill the great mitzvah of eating matzah was enormous. The flour was hidden in a secret place, guarded very carefully so that no harm would come to it. Bit by bit, Goldkorn smuggled in enough flour to bake matzahs for nearly 100 Jews, each of whom would receive one olive-sized piece of matzah. As Pesach drew nearer, the members of this group, at the risk of their lives, managed to bake the matzahs in Block C. Die Kleine Werkstein, small workshops where bread was baked for the ghetto families. With permission from the directors of the Werkstätten, this group managed to bake all the matzahs over a 10-day period after preparing the oven according to halakha. But the happiest of them all was Goldkorn, for he had merited the privilege of bringing the flour in, not only for himself, but for the other Jews. At that time, it was indeed a very great mitzvah that Goldkorn had fulfilled, providing the means for so many people to fulfill this aspect of the holiday of freedom in according with halakha, inspiring hope in his fellow Jews that they might yet live to celebrate this holiday with joy after the defeat of the German enemies. 2 days before Pesach, Goldkorn was returning from his labor in the evening. He was stopped by German police and searched. A small bag of flour was found on his person. When the Germans realized that a Jew, despite their strict orders to bring no food into the ghetto, had dared violate their edict, they beat him violently and viciously all along his entire body. But the worst of it was they broke all of his teeth. Yes, this Jew, throughout all of his suffering, accepted it with love for his creator, knowing that he had made it possible for so many others to fulfill a precious mitzvah. Afterward, Goldkorn came to me with a very serious problem. Anybody want to guess what Goldkorn's shaila was going to be?
How could, well, it says it, how could he eat the matzah?
Oh, well, okay. After Goldkorn came to me with a very serious problem. As he spoke, he broke into tears. With my broken teeth, how can I fulfill the mitzvah of eating an olive-sized piece of matzah? Since I come from a Hasidic family whose custom is never to eat matzah, that is so gebrutz, on Pesach, how can I break that custom now? Is there any way for me to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah? The tradition of not soaking matzah is a stringency. Halakha does not forbid soaking matzah. I allow the questioner to soak the matzah in water, even though he was descended from Hasidim, whose custom was not to eat soaked matzah on Pesach, because he had no other way of fulfilling the mitzvah, a mitzvah for which he had risked his life. I did, however, instruct him to obtain permission from a beis din of 3 people. Why do you think he put him through that he had to get permission from this beis din? He wanted him to feel that he was going through the right procedures, just like even a poor person is supposed to give matanot levyonim on Purim. It's not to make life more difficult. Now, just a few more brief points. Another question was, every morning we say, thank you, God, for making me a free person. So the question here is, how can I say that? How can I recite the blessing of a free man? How can a hungry slave repeatedly abused and demeaned praise his creator by uttering, who has not made me a slave? I was then asked for the Torah ruling on this question. Should the blessing be omitted? Because it did seem to be a travesty, in which case it would be forbidden to recite it. Or was it forbidden to alter or skip any part of the prayer text established by our sages? What do you think? Oshri answers this questioner, why he should say it. And it gets us back to what we said a while ago, about probably 45 minutes ago, when I said that they did have some control over their mental state. And Oshri says, one of the earliest commentators on the prayers points out that this blessing was formulated in order to praise God, not for our physical liberty, but rather for our spiritual liberty. I therefore ruled that we could not skip or alter this blessing under any circumstance. On the contrary, despite our physical captivity, we were more obligated than ever to recite the blessing, to demonstrate to our enemies that even if physically we were slaves as a people, we remained spiritually free. That's something we've heard Sharansky say, how he kept saying. Now, what was behind these shilas? In an effort, Yad Vashem says, to preserve their identity as human beings, just like they would find ways to shave before Shabbos. They attempted to maintain their family life and cultural traditions. This was an attempt to not only resist losing their individuality, but also a strong desire to retain family life, professions, dignity, and their very existence. During this period, a new concept was created in the ghettos and camps called the sanctification of life. Überleben, to outlive. This meant that each individual would do everything possible to foil the Nazis' attempt to destroy the Jewish people as a community and as individuals. A common theme running through these mostly unrelated occurrences was the belief that physical survival carried a spiritual element as well. One needed an additional goal or belief to cling to in order to draw the inner strength to survive.
But bracha, according to halacha, you're allowed to break halacha according to conditions, not just in the Shoah. A person on the road who cannot fulfill everything else is allowed not to.
Well, you're not meant to endanger your life.
Yeah.
Pikuach nefesh, and there are 3 specific things
It's not only
that you are meant to give up your life, but of course, but what Yad Vashem and others who have written and talked to us on this is trying to explain why there was they didn't want to find a loophole. They wanted to be able to observe as much as they could, not just because they were giving thanks in a ridiculous situation, but what it gave them. Now, this is part 1.
I don't agree with you.
I want to close with something that Itz Greenberg, everybody knows him by that name, Rabbi Irving Greenberg, in talking about commemorating Yom HaShoah. There are different suggestions, and people have written cantatas, and there's the Megillat HaShoah, and people give certain tzedakah to remember chesed. But he suggests that probably the most important act that people can do on the night of Yom HaShoah is to do what? I dare anybody. if it's a response to the destruction and the loss of lives, how do we counter that?
To celebrate life.
You light a
Something
candle.
very specific. What?
You light a candle to send out the darkness.
Nope.
You
We do
pray.
that.
You
Something
pray.
very specific. We've lost people. So what do we have to do? And you
Remember,
Have more food, have more children.
exactly. He says Yom HaShoah or Leil Yom HaShoah should be a night where people make love and try to have another child. If that isn't life triumphing, I don't know what is.
wow.
Anyway, we will continue next time with looking more at what is suggested by the goal and something very specific about the covenant that we have with God, that even though it might have broken a bit during the Shoah, how we rebuild it. And our obsession with redemption. And we think about that certainly during Pesach, and it's all tied in. Our constant belief that there will be a better day, and we need to believe that, very much keeps us going.
Yeah.
I have to share a story that I thought of as you mentioned Betty. So some of you will remember that Betty, on her 100th birthday, was given the first aliyah as a woman.
Right.
In the shul, when the shul decided.
Yeah.
Okay, and she
Yeah.
was 100. So how many years ago was that?
9.
I don't, anyway. So we go home from shul that day, and Batya had a friend with hers. And they take out a board game. And I don't remember whether it was Batya or Molly says, oh, Betty wouldn't be able to play this, because you know how it says on the boards between 9 and 99? Oh, anyway, we need to laugh.
Yeah.
All right.
Very
True.
So we pray that everyone be safe, and we pray for the refuah of anyone who needs it and those who are victims of these attacks. And we will go on. Lo tinatzchu oti, as Naomi Shemer said. Lo tinatzchu oti.
And laughter is so important.
Very, very important. Very, very important. Okay. All right. I bid you a good evening.
HASHOAH.
Okay.
HASHOAH.
Yeah.
Be well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Lala tov.
Laila tov.
Yeah.